Hi, everybody. I don't know if we've heard, but women's sports is big business. Have we all heard this? I feel like we should have by now. Kim, thank you for joining me on stage. It's such a pleasure to share this space with you and have this conversation. I wanted to start with Athletes Unlimited's inaugural softball season, a month removed from that conclusion. What's been the biggest takeaway as far as what's worked and what you guys want to implement in year two?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, and love being here with you. So first of all, AUSL, this was our inaugural season. We had 4 teams traveling to 12 different markets across the country. In terms of the metrics that came back after the season, just so incredible. We had 24 sellouts. We had over $1 million sold in merchandise. We had nearly 350,000 in viewership for our championship series. And we had about 240 million social impressions. So in terms of all of those indexes, just a great success. Anecdotally, just people coming to us, and talking about how grateful they were. Challenges. So this year, 2026, we'll be expanding to 6 teams. And we'll be locking those teams down into home city markets, so going to a traditional city-based model. So that in and of itself is going to be a challenge, but I think also to just keep up the hype. I mean, it's not just about attraction and adding new fans, but it's really about retention as well. So, pulling those 2 levers throughout is going to be obviously part of our focus, a lot of our focus.
One of those metrics was viewership was up 88% year over year. But that average viewership is still hovering around 150,000, a little under 150,000. How do you guys measure success? Because it does no good to compare to these legendary leagues that have existed forever. So how do you guys measure success when it comes to improving that viewership year over year?
I think you have to look at your own success and your own metrics first and foremost, and to make sure that you are increasing and hopefully substantially increasing year over year. But then I think we also look to some of the earlier histories of the WNBA and the NWSL, and again, so taking, of course, the championship series and comparing it to those of the other 2 leagues. I took a look at that, and when you put that into context, we were, in our first year with those 2 leagues, were in their championship series about 5 or 6 years ago. Now, I am not saying in any way that we are on that trajectory, right? But in theory, and not in theory, in practicality, we are drafting off of their success. But I think, for a burgeoning league, that we have to really look to our own selves and make sure that we are increasing year over year.
You talked about that touring model this season and changing to a more traditional model in year 2. What was the benefit of starting with that touring model? What was the intention behind that before transitioning into a more traditional model for AUSL?
Yeah, I think the thought was really was very deliberate, and I think one of the biggest factors of our success will be the great local partners that we have, and making sure that we can work with them and that they have all of our best interests in mind, and that we want to really be pillars of that community. So we picked 12 markets across the country, like I mentioned, and it was really making sure that that there were local partners on the ground that we thought we could be successful with. And so as we go forward and pick those 6 markets, we are most likely going to stay to that pool. Maybe there's someone else from the outside, but it's really going to have to be with that long-term look in mind.
The global softball game is quite impressive. In fact, I learned a ton about it since joining Front Office Sports and researching a story on the Japan Diamond League. You guys this year reached over 190 countries, and that global reach is so important in terms of the growth of softball collectively. How do you guys assess where AUSL can stand in the global game?
Yeah, I think, so first of all, in terms of our expansion, we're going to the 6 teams, and there are more spots for additional players. I think, one of the one of the things that we really look forward to in this arena is the 2028 Olympics. And we talk about the Olympics quite often in a lot of our long-term strategy sessions. That really is sort of the guiding light, and it's making sure that we have good relationships with those folks in the JDL, and there's a new burgeoning Mexican league as well that has come onto the scene. But I think as we grow and as our number of roster spots continues to increase, we obviously hold spaces for international players. And I think you'll see a catapult once those 28 Olympics happen, and hopefully US brings gold home. And as AUSL continues to grow, this will be seen as a phenomenal place for all the world's best players.
So when we talk about the Japan Diamond League, it's one of the most lucrative places for softball players to play. Beyond that, it's also one of the most exciting environments. For anybody that isn't aware, Google the Japan Diamond League. It's really thrilling. But when it comes to maybe lessons that can be taken away from that league, what is AUSL doing in terms of researching what's been successful with the Japan Diamond League and seeing what could potentially work here with AUSL?
Yeah, JDL is really interesting. It's essentially corporations, right? It's a league of corporations that then fund and support athletes. So I'm not quite sure that model would work in the US, but of course having great partners certainly does, right? And so having partners like Sephora, who we were able to form a partnership with a couple of months ago, or maybe 6 weeks ago, having great partners that we can really put forward in our league, I think makes a lot of sense. In Japan, they play 2 games on the weekends and they don't play during the week. I'm not sure that would necessarily be a sustainable model that we could follow here. So that wouldn't work. But I think, in general, trying to have those players, give them a platform, and, hopefully we get the compensation to where it needs to be. But that'll take some time. But those are some of the things that we look to.
What's AUSL's plan for attracting some of those international players?
Yeah, so right now we have, I would say, 15-20% of our players currently playing in the JDL. And so I think word of mouth certainly is there. But I think making those connections and, getting some of those players from the JDL to come play at AUSL, I think is something that we've got for sure in our minds. I think as I mentioned, the 28 Olympics is coming up. So I think them sending their players over for us to take metrics on them before the Olympics is not something that's going to happen. So we have to be really mindful of that. But I think just the natural organic connection to the JDL is where we are.
When you talk about the Olympics, softball obviously will return to the Olympic Games in 2028 after a hiatus in 2024. What's AUSL's plan as far as maximizing the lead up to the Olympics and then also capitalizing off of the attention that will follow Los Angeles 2028? Right.
So more than a year ago, we had about 50% of the national team playing for Athletes Unlimited. Last off season, we were able to capture another 25% of the national team, and hopefully this year we'll probably get up to, I would say, 90 to 95% of that national team. And really, I mean, our plan is to work with Team USA so that we're not cannibalizing each other's audience, and to really try and have a cohesive, concerted effort in terms of how we present the game of softball to the larger audience. And so, as we lead up, and obviously, Team USA is going to have a lot to do with this and where their direction is. But, it could be in showcasing those, and having Team USA come play as a team within some of our showcases, within perhaps our All-Star Cup that takes place in August. So there are, I think, some events that we can do leading up to the 28 Olympics and certainly thereafter.
Yeah, we've seen a similar model in the WNBA with the All-Star Games during Olympic years featuring Team USA and the All-Star WNBA team and the success that's come from those exhibition games. How much do you guys look at, again, you mentioned the NWSL earlier, you mentioned the WNBA earlier. How much are you guys looking to these other leagues as the mark of success and what you can garner from them and apply in AUSL?
Yeah, it's like a salad buffet, right? I mean, you know, I do think that the NWSL and the WNBA have done a lot of the hard work. Not that we don't have a lot on our own, but you know, clearly there are learnings to be had from those two leagues. And then PWHL is also someone that we look to quite a bit as a single owner entity, which we are as well. So, you know, we try and take the best from each. We are, you know, and that's one interesting thing for me, having come from the men's sports world to now the women's. You know, everyone on the women's side is so, you know, because it's you know, on the men's side, there are much more mature systems. On the women's side, obviously, there are still a lot of growing pains and learnings. And so I think in general, it's very collaborative. I've been shocked at how many people are willing to say, yeah, we tried that didn't work. And yeah, no, you might want to try this and you might want to go here. And so it's been really fun for me to learn as much as I can about those other leagues.
Yeah, how does that freedom lead to innovation in women's sports? I mean, you said yourself that these men's leagues are kind of set in their ways, and when it comes to women's sports, there's more freedom to try and fail.
Well, I don't know about the failure part. But no, I do think that freedom exists, right? And like I said, I think the collaboration and you know, I think the women's group in general sees themselves, I mean, this is probably a bit of a strong term, but, you know, understands the fight, right? And so they probably see themselves more as a unit than, you know, a more mature system. So I do think that there is a lot of freedom to innovate and to create. We just had 2 days worth of meetings talking about how do we modify, let's think about this, let's, I don't want to say go, you know, back to the drawing board, but let's try and make sure that we are providing the best possible product that we can, and not being constrained by necessarily you know, other leagues or what's happened in the past, but really trying to be creative in going forward and listening to our athletes, quite frankly, you know, and fans as well, you know, and really taking their thoughts and perspectives into play.
The Women's College World Series is one of the biggest stages in women's sports. And over the years, we haven't exactly seen that excitement, that hype translate to the professional game here in America. There's been multiple leagues that have unfortunately folded over the last decade and a half. What about AUSL says that this is the league that's going to stick? This is the league that's going to break through and become mainstream here in America? So
that's a lot in one question. So I guess where I can go with that. So the Women's College World Series, year after year, it's not just increasing and doing better and improving. I mean, they're hitting records year after year. And so that's really the exciting part. And not only do we see it at the College World Series, but now we're seeing at the bottom of this, not the bottom, but the other side of the softball ecosystem, and that's the Little League World Series, right? And we're seeing you know, record year over year you know, viewership. So I think when you look at the entire ecosystem, what's been missing, what has not been a consistent and a constant is that pro league. So I think what fans have to take and be really mindful and you know, heartened by is the fact that, you know, AUSL has some runway. Not only seen by, you know, our co-founders, John Patricoff and Jonathan Soros, but also by the you know, investor scene. So, you know, Major League Baseball, you know, took that
pretty significant investment for Major League Baseball.
Yeah, they took that leap in May when we announced that they were going to be an investor in AUSL. And I will say, having worked at Major League Baseball for 10 years, they don't take these types of investments lightly. And it took up until this point for them to feel comfortable in what was going on in the pro landscape. And, you know, me having been a part of the baseball and softball development team, knew that that was, definitely the way that they looked at it. So I think what fans take, and I think this is what we saw in terms of the, the catapulting effect we had for the league was, MLB coming and supporting and standing side by side and, across their platforms. And so, again, I worked there for 10 years, but understanding how they work, I had never seen such investment, and forget the financial part, but investment in terms of human resources, in terms of dedication across, 10 plus different departments, across their platforms. MLB Network, they had 5 of our games. We were on MLB.com.tv, our non-exclusive games in front of the paywall. They had game highlights throughout the season. They had game coverage. So the support, not just in a verbal and fiduciary way, but in a meaningful, very visible way for us. And we talk and we say, okay, when's it going to wear off? It's not wearing off. They're coming stronger with more ideas and more support. This off-season planning for 2026 because we got such a late jump this year. But it really has been incredible support.
When you talk about just the fact that MLB doesn't take these investments lightly, that 8-figure investment from them, what was the difference now? What happened in those conversations that told them, okay, this is the time we're willing to invest in softball?
So I think in previous iterations, they were never really quite sure of the revenue. And I think, in this particular case, I think seeing the product that was out on the field, and really it involves having the best talent, which, as I mentioned, we had 75% of that national team. And I think, understanding the runway that we had, in previous iterations of a pro softball league, they were living hand to mouth. And so, obviously you can't make those types of investments in situations like that. So I think they really saw, the runway that we had and, and hopefully they maybe saw me as a link to the future.
We can't talk about softball without talking about the Nigeri Kennedy and her $1 million arm. Truly remarkable. When it comes to her professional career, what is the vision of the way she's going to impact the professional game, whatever decision that she makes regarding her pro career?
Yeah, listen, she is a generational talent, for sure, and a generational figure, and she stands out there in many different ways. And again, that record viewership, for the College World Series in which she was leading the league and they pitched her. I will say one of the things for me, going from softball to baseball, we don't pitch our pitchers like that 3 days in a row. It's incredible. But, in terms of her and her future, clearly she would be, an incredible player in our league. But, I think, and listen, NIL is changing the world, the college athletic world, and I think the pro sports world is feeling the effects of that. But I think in terms of Nyjah, I think if I were Nyjah, the one thing that I would have to be really mindful of is the platform that I have, or what is the platform I can now have. And I think that has to be at the front of her mind. And if it's not, hopefully, she will get that as she starts to think about her future. But, in terms of AUSL and the platform that we have, like I mentioned, the ESPN has been a great partner since the beginning for Athletes Unlimited. And we've seen that the way that they have grown the college softball viewership. So I think that, that has to be pointed out. And so moving forward in terms of AUSL, MLB, clearly, putting us on their platform and their visibility and what that can lead to us being with ESPN this year and hopefully in the future, what that will look like. I think that has to be at the forefront of her mind.
You mentioned your 10 years with Major League Baseball, but your experience in professional baseball obviously spans multiple decades, including with the Chicago White Sox, our hometown team. I don't know about that other team in town. But I'm curious how that experience shapes the way you're approaching your role with AUSL and what specifics you've brought over in terms of applying them and producing success with AUSL.
Yeah, I think having seen that league having seen that ecosystem at its highest level and knowing what that looks like, both from an infrastructure perspective as well as a player relations perspective, and the insight that I can provide in multiple areas, I think really is at the core of that. And, and knowing the pitfalls and the downsides. As I mentioned, though, the one part where it is a little bit different is that this is new, and you do have the ability to color outside the lines. And when we colored outside the lines in my former life, we were pretty intentional about it. Whereas here, you can go outside the lines by accident, and nothing bad will necessarily happen. And so I think, I think having all of that experience and understanding what it looks like and the downsides is huge.
Your tenure in Major League Baseball included multiple stops, 3 years with the Marlins, where you broke through that glass ceiling and were an example for so many of us in terms of what's required, what's expected, and the challenges that come when you do make it there. What contributed to that decision just to veer from the Marlins and from Major League Baseball and take a left into women's sports?
So I think, first and foremost, breaking that glass ceiling was incredible. Given the opportunity to do that was incredible, and then succeeding, where we took the Marlins in it, first time in 20 years, first full season, and took them to the playoffs. I think something that we have to point to in terms of women as the heads of the operation. So I'm very proud of that, and I think women should continue, and men should continue to look at that. In terms of taking a left, I don't know if it's taking a left, right? Because I think a lot of my career has been about standing up for women and presenting more opportunities, whether it's actually paving the path in sort of the way that we typically think about it, or if it's paving the path for more opportunities with a burgeoning new league that we think has great potential for success. So for me, it was probably, I guess, within that established, mature system, it was, for front office executives and maybe journalists, et cetera. But here it's, in softball, it's about the players and giving them the opportunity and a great opportunity to succeed that they probably have never had before, and giving that platform, that high visibility, that elevated platform and experience that they've never had before. And then having them use their platforms to enhance even further. So it's really a mutual collaboration.
It's a new version of uncharted territory. When it comes to women's sports, we so often get stuck in this celebratory mode, which is important. But how do we balance celebrating with sustainable success and hitting those measures of success?
Right. So it's celebrating, but it's also pointing to why you're celebrating and telling that story, and making sure you're getting into the right rooms and in front of the right people to say why you have been celebrating, or why you celebrated, past tense, right? I mean, it's, 2 weeks after the season and we've just had meetings and we're off to the next thing, right? And it's about leaving no stone unturned in all of this. So, in terms of sustainable success, we know we have a long way to go. But I think, there's a lot to be proud of. There's a lot of proof of concept. I mean, I'll tell you about probably the pinnacle of the season was not just our championship series and the viewership that we got there, but we went to Round Rock, Texas, which is the AAA affiliate of the Texas Rangers, and we converted that baseball field to a softball field. But those are the venues that could really hold the capacity that we're looking for, and we sold it out now. So there are a lot of indicators that suggested we could sell it out, but to have that proof of concept and to then take that proof of concept and talk to others about it and tell them why we succeeded in this year, I think is really important. So it's not about keeping the celebration going. I think it's about storytelling and telling why we were successful and why it will continue to grow.
We'll end it here. How will you measure AUSL's success over the next 5 years? How will you be able to walk away whenever that day comes from this position and say, okay, we did what we needed to?
Well, I think we got a very great first step forward. But listen, our plan is to expand this year and hopefully in several years, and to really create a firm, stable foundation. And that curve, it doesn't go like this, right? It's a slow grow, and then all of a sudden you see it explode. But it's first about creating that firm, stable foundation so that you can experience that exponential growth. And so I guess all that to say that we have to be measured and realistic about what the future holds and not get out over our skis and do crazy, silly things. You can do those, but you have to do them small.
Pick your spot.
Exactly. So that's what I would say.
Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for Kim Ng, please.
Thank you so much.